So, something that was kind of inevitable when it came to the Boom Studios Power Rangers comics was the comment that certain arcs or characters feel like fan fiction, which is a critique understandably contested by fans because it basically just ends up being, I don't like the choices made with my favorite IP in disguise, like a realtor in Scooby-Doo dressed up as a monster. So because of this, I try to avoid falling into the pit of it feels like fan fiction whenever critiquing the comics myself, even when by the end of the 2016 main series, a lot of my problems with the books can be directed at what's commonly attributed to fan fiction. The way canon characters' journeys and relationships diverge from the show, and, of course, the comic-exclusive characters. And it's especially hard to not take the easy way out with how much I hate this one specific comic-exclusive character, Matthew Cook, and simply say he feels like a 12-year-old Mary Sue OC from his self-insert fanfiction rather than subject you to this essay where I subjected myself to rereading the storylines centered around this character I hate. I had to go back and reread Mighty Morphin number 5, which I haven't touched since 2021. I'm doing this for you guys. In simple terms, Matt proves how a single character can drag down entire stories and personalities because of how much gets changed and retconned in order to justify his existence. An existence that, at the end of the day, only serves corporate desires. I know people were asking if he would become a Ranger years before he actually did, and I don't even think the idea of him becoming a Ranger is the worst. In fact, Dan Mora's 2019 sketchbook has this design concept with him as some kind of original silver MMPR, which was at least a creative take on the idea. It's just that the execution is arguably one of the worst in the series by how much it favors him at the expense of everybody and everything else, and eventually turned me from overall neutral on him to censoring his name every time I type it out. So, to start out, for those who may not know him, Matthew Cook is introduced in the prequel series Go-Go Power Rangers as sort of the original Tommy. He's the group's sixth, childhood friends with Zach, and quickly hooks up with Kim when she moves into Angel Grove, basically being the one that introduces and integrates her into the group. Though we don't actually see how they first met exactly, Kim and Matt, I mean. The earliest we get is just their first date when he says she's been living in Angel Grove for a couple of weeks. Tensions start to escalate when his friends all become Power Rangers and have to keep their double lives secret from him as per Zordon's rules about not revealing their identities. Though through continued proximity, he starts to notice Ranger stuff keeps happening around him, to the point that for an arc he's held hostage by Rita and replaced by a shape-shifting Putty, and it convinces him that he's special in some way. Through a face-to-face meeting with Ranger Slayer and alternate universe Kimberly Hart, he learns the truth about everything and demands to hear it from his friends' mouths. When they don't admit it, he leaves the group and refuses to speak with them afterwards. Kim confirms to Skull in a later issue that she and Matt had officially broken up, and though it's not shown if this was decided between them in conversation or if it just became official by way of him abandoning her and moving on with other people, him giving them the silent treatment and hanging out with other girls in a way confirmed by Billy and Zach to make her jealous specifically, points more towards the latter. Eventually, spurred on by Kim's guidance counselor in an encounter during a fight, Kim and Matt apologize to each other and they seem to move on into the events of MMPR on okay terms. This is weirdly contradictory to how Matt is introduced in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Due to the fact that, despite being a prequel, Go-Go Power Rangers started close to 2 years into the main MMPR series publishing, Matt himself is only mentioned by name and brought up for the first time in MMPR number 17. At this point in the timeline, Kim's parents have divorced, and in a conversation with her mother, Kim brings up how her father seems to be arguing with his new girlfriend and suggests he and her mother could take the opportunity to get back together, as people in love should be able to make things work. Kim's mom counters that if that were true, Kim and Matt would still be speaking to each other. Kim visibly flinches at this and runs away from the conversation despite her mother immediately apologizing for it, seeming to recognize that she went too far. The second time he comes up is in MMPR number 25, when Kim is explaining to Tommy why she's been running from the possibility of them getting together. She talks about how she's been letting her parents' divorce scare her, as well as the fact that her last relationship with Matt didn't end well. That's the last time he's mentioned in MMPR because more important things like Draken murdering Tommy and shattering the grid happen, because this was back when things more important than Matt were allowed to happen. So much like other concepts introduced in Go-Go Power Rangers and therefore brought up or integrated into MMPR later, Matt is essentially a retcon. his only relevance in MMPR at this point being an additional layer to Kim's emotional trauma towards relationships, which frankly isn't really needed when her parents' divorce provides enough of a foundation for that. If you read MMPR and not Go-Go Power Rangers, you wouldn't even get the impression that Matt was also friends with the rest of the group because he does not exist outside of the concept of Kim's ex-boyfriend that somehow ended badly enough to the point that he and Kim are completely cut off, and she's so traumatized by it that she's terrified of starting a new relationship with Tommy. No one else brings him up, we don't see him in crowd shots at Angel Grove High, he is a complete non-entity. Because of the two series running at the same time, fans were pretty quick to fill in the gaps for why this was. The most popular theories I saw were that by MMPR's time he had either moved away from Angel Grove or that he straight up died in something like a monster fight. The latter not really likely since Kim's mom didn't address him like he was dead, just that he and Kim weren't speaking to each other anymore, but so Matt's going to die, right? Because he doesn't exist in the show, was assumed as soon as he was introduced, and it will be a common thought throughout the entirety of the main series, even when he comes in as a regular character again. So, because of these factors, it's really weird that Go-Go Power Rangers' answer to what happened to him ended up being, so the guidance counselor told Kim that she should, keep in mind how other people feel, so she apologizes, and he apologizes, and they're fine now. But they still just never spoke again. Like, I can believe that Kim is still traumatized even after they apologize, but MMPR doesn't imply that they ever meaningfully interacted ever again, based on what Kim's mom says, and based on how we just never see him. Unfortunately, this general sense of Matt's faults and the harm he's done getting erased in favor of, no, see, he's fine, everything's fine, will be a pattern with his character going forward, and as such, turn his character into the hated mess I consider him today. Because really, Matt as a character is actually pretty interesting and well thought out in early Go-Go Power Rangers. I think the idea that the Rangers had friends beyond just their team is an interesting idea to explore, and the fallout of that friendship because of their Ranger stuff interfering with their personal lives is a great way of showing how some things are just forever changed due to this shift in their lives. And for the most part, Matt was a pretty well-rounded character. He was obviously friendly and brave and cared about his friends and girlfriend deeply. He was someone Billy considered an ideal candidate for being a Ranger, even if Billy made this decision at the time when Matt was replaced by a putty and thus judging him by the putty's heroic acts. But he was also very much a big man on campus type who was clearly used to getting what he wanted and let himself be too caught up in his own feelings and place in the world to the point where, when faced with the reality that he isn't the main character of the story, is perfectly fine with abandoning his friends and girlfriend rather than hearing their side of things or even caring that they were trying to look out for him. The Rangers being upset about the fact they couldn't tell Matt about their Ranger duties or protect him better against Rita is one of the biggest conflicts of early Go-Go Power Rangers, and Matt never seems to consider that they felt this way, despite there being multiple scenes where they are clearly trying to keep him away from monster fights or warn him about getting too in over his head. All he cared about was that they lied to him, and by extension, he wasn't special like he thought. He definitely came off like a deconstruction of what would be the protagonist in any other teen story or even another Power Rangers season. The brave, handsome, athletic quarterback doesn't get everything he wants, leaving ruined relationships in his wake. But at the same time, it wasn't all bad. In Billy trying and failing to give Matt his power coin because he believes Matt is the ideal candidate for a Ranger and not him, Billy learns to believe in his own strengths as a Ranger and that Matt doesn't deserve the power coin just for existing as a handsome athletic quarterback. It's something spelled out by Jason saying that Zordon chose Billy, not Matt, and it wasn't because Billy just happened to be standing next to everyone when they were teleported out. But the problem with this is Matt does apparently deserve a power coin just for existing as a handsome athletic quarterback. So moving along with the summary, during the Necessary Evil arc of Go-Go Power Rangers, which lined itself up to the show by the episode, to its detriment, but that's a discussion for another day, Kim is sad because Tommy has just left for his uncle's cabin after losing the green powers for good, and Matt just conveniently pops up again, weirdly knowledgeable about Kim's life and relationships up to this point, despite them not speaking for ages, to offer himself as a confidant to her. The two start hanging out again until Tommy comes back, which Matt is just so saddened by, and leaves again. Note that he does not hang out with any of the MMPRs, who were also his friends and knew longer than he knew Kim. He just comes in, talks to Kim, Tommy comes back, he leaves, and that's it. And for what it's worth, despite what you might think would happen, the situation isn't really a love triangle, nor does it develop into one, though sometimes it comes off like one was planned but got cut along the way. Kim never entertains the idea that she might want to leave Tommy for him or doubt her feelings for Tommy at all, or at very least, we never see this on screen. Kim and Matt's relationship does eventually get fully repaired, but it's entirely platonic, and she makes it clear that she's fully in love with Tommy throughout the entire series. And Matt will get a later love interest through Aisha later on. The arc is still gross, though, with the implications that getting back together at the time was Matt's desire, and taking advantage of Tommy being gone to make that happen, something literally described by the author as sliding into Kim's DMs. However, Matt is not seen as in the wrong for this, and while he doesn't end up with Kim in the end, this is the first arc that alludes to him becoming a Power Ranger eventually, and the fact that he not only becomes a Ranger but gets Tommy's original powers in the first place, well, it feels bad, but we're moving along. Go-Go Power Rangers finishes, Necessary Evil in the MMPR series starts, no one brings up Matt until the start of the Mighty Morphin / Power Rangers series, where he starts becoming a major character again on the Mighty Morphin side through Billy and Grace getting the green coin working again and choosing him as its user. It's like a whole thing where Billy is stealing Zordon stuff and we have to pretend this isn't something Zordon's allowed to be mad over. So funnily enough, Matt's entire existence as a Ranger falls into this shut up and sit down and accept this idea. When Zed attacks the city with his new Dark Rangers, Matt manages to defeat him by blowing up his Chaos Crystal in his face. Yes, Matt defeats Lord Zed in a one-on-one fight in his first outing with the green powers. Like, I know we all hated how Necessary Evil had the Omegas defeat Zed, but at the very least, they needed a Zord in order to win the fight. He spends the next few issues operating secretly until finally when Zed puts Angel Grove in a big dome to rule on his own, he decides to reveal his identity to the world to boost morale. He and Tommy start off on bad terms, but eventually come to an understanding, even combining the Dragon Zord and White Tiger Zord for the Eltarian War event's big final battle, something people have always wanted but probably wanted to see by Tommy commanding both powers and not some random OC. Also, this debut will end up being the only time this combination will show up in the comics, interestingly enough. He gets a somewhat major arc after that highlights his friendship with Rocky, even amounting to Matt giving Rocky the Dragon Shield, but doesn't do much in the Death Ranger storyline lead up to the 100th issue or the issue itself outside of them making a Thunder Megazord Dragon Zord combination, which actually shows up more than the Dragon Zord White Tiger Zord combination. Finally, in Darkest Hour, he gets a somewhat major presence when he allows himself to be captured by the newly returned Rita, now Mistress Vile, to save everyone else, and they recreate Green with Evil, ultimately murdering Grace with his own hands. But after he's freed from that, his major contribution to the story arc is getting over his trauma thanks to a new romance with Aisha. As Tommy stays behind on Earth while the rest of the MMPRs go to the Zeo Crystal planet for the big final battle, Matt steals Tommy's place in the big final group morph, just like how he steals everything else from Tommy. And then the last time we see him, he's hugging Adam, Aisha, and Rocky after their victory, and that's it. Oh, and Grace's death at his hands was wiped from existence and replaced with her dying on the moon in 1969. So in case you were wondering if he was going to face repercussions from that, he doesn't. If Matt's post-Go-Go Power Rangers summary seems less detailed than his Go-Go Power Rangers one, it's partly because he's in a lot of books that would take way too long to summarize in depth, and also it's just very annoying to talk about and read those arcs in general. But also because, ironically, despite him becoming one of the central protagonists of the series somehow, his actual impact on the story really isn't anything beyond the fact that he's the Green Ranger and part of the team now, which leads me into why this character just sucks. You probably noticed from my less than professional interludes that Matt's journey has a very prominent pattern. Everything he does ends up fine for him no matter what. He abandons his friends and traumatizes his girlfriend, but he ends up close to his ex again, and Billy still considers him close enough that he's the ideal Green Ranger candidate, and the Omegas accept him instantly even though they've been off Earth for months and have no insight on anything. Also, even if Billy didn't specifically choose Matt, the initial arc has Billy tell Grace they should choose someone the Rangers trust when she initially suggests giving Draken the coin, and never argues with Matt being the new user afterwards. It's actually a little confusing as to specifically whether Billy or Grace chose him. I think it's just Billy suggests him and Grace gives him the green light. Green light. He even gets a new love interest in the form of Aisha later on, a character he never has any sort of one-on-one conversation with, much less a scene together in the Mighty Morphin / Power Rangers era. He beats Zed in his first ever fight period, not just first fight with the powers, because he doesn't have any karate or martial arts training, and Zed swears revenge against him. This is never followed up on, even when Promethea pretends to join up with Zed later and then betrays him. He murders Grace, but thanks to Billy breaking the grid, this event is apparently wiped from history because now the timeline has been altered so Grace died on the moon in 1969. He's been a ranger for maybe a few months at best. Rocky suddenly considers him the ideal standard of a ranger on par with Jason and Tommy. Zordon personally gives him his blessing in being a new ranger after Matt tells him to his face that he doesn't respect him and previously said very xenophobic comments about him. Do I have to go on, or do you understand what I'm talking about? A lot of this is because the books are clearly trying to give him conflict for him to deal with, but it never pans out the way it should be because by design this character has no believable angst or conflict to derive a story from because everything goes right for him, especially after they've scrubbed what few legit flaws he had back in Go-Go Power Rangers in favor of the world's most goodest boy. He's not the big man on campus or self-confident to the point of arrogant anymore. At the very least, he acts like this and the books don't present this as a problem. He's nothing but kind and humble and secretly scared of everything and just wants to be there for his friends that he hasn't talked to outside of Kim for months. The narration really loves to tell you that this guy insists that he's so scared of everything and so scared of being a hero and doesn't want to be a ranger, when in fact he was the complete opposite. This is the guy who ran into a Zord fight to try and prove that he was special, but now we're trying to act like he's always doubting himself and his actions. But at least this allows characters around him to boost him up and remind him how brave and amazing he is. And this doesn't come off like the result of character development or anything. It's just that they don't want to write these flaws anymore and instead present him as vulnerable and sympathetic as possible in an attempt to make him more likable. Darkest Hour at first tries to write it so he feels like he's expendable, an idea that has potential because he is an unneeded add-on to the MMPRs, but then it swivels to him feeling like a replacement, with him admitting to Grace that he doesn't think he'll be good enough replacement for Tommy, and then telling Aisha while evil that he likes her because they're both replacements. So which is it? He's the extra unneeded limb, or he doesn't feel like he can fill Tommy's shoes? Well, the answer is neither, because neither is accurate to his place in the group. The Rangers clearly don't see him as expendable. He's always included with the group in and out of Ranger suit. Tommy personally invites him on the mission to the moon. Kim has multi-issue breakdowns over Matt getting kidnapped. He's not a replacement by definition. Specifically, he's definitely not a replacement like Aisha was, because Tommy had become the White Ranger long before Matt became green. Frankly, it's more accurate to say Tommy was the replacement for Matt in the friend group, not the other way around. What the books try to use as justification for this attitude is a flashback where Matt gets left behind holding the popcorn at the movie theater because Kim, Trini, and Zach start walking ahead of him. Yeah. They can't even do something with his family life because his family is a perfectly conventional mother and father who worry about his lost football scholarship for about a page, but then 100% love and support him afterwards. Darkest Hour even takes away the potential tension between him and Grace, that Grace might have only used him as a means to an end of acquiring her own personal Power Ranger and didn't think of him as more than that, to the point where she was framed as the Rita Repulsa to Matt's Green Ranger, to the book suddenly saying how much she cares about him and picked him because of his good heart. And I think I need to mention once again that his whole murdered Grace thing gets wiped from the timeline, which even then Grace's history being altered doesn't alter his path of getting the green coin in the first place. He can't even be punished by the Power Rangers timeline itself. The series ends with him having the coin. I was so ready for Matt to have the most obnoxious over-the-top Christ allegory death because then at least he would be gone, but they don't even do that. In probably one of the most frustrating instances of this, back in the third act of Eltarian War event, Zach and Tommy are talking about Matt. Zach tells Tommy that he understands that Tommy's real problem with Matt is that he's Kim's ex, and Tommy's letting his jealousy and worries that Kim might go back to Matt now that he's a Power Ranger cloud his judgment. Keep in mind, before all of this, Matt has A, joined up with Zed, B, waited until the last second to save Tommy from a fight that he almost died in, C, fight with Tommy's decisions as leader, including wanting to summon the Dragon Zord while they're trying to hide and scope things out in the Eltarian invasion. C, in general, follow Grace's orders, even the morally dubious ones, like the before-mentioned let Tommy fight until he's just about to die, with barely any resistance. D, Even if he didn't know the details of what happened, Tommy knows Matt and Kim had a bad breakup that hurt his own relationship with Kim for a while, and yes, Matt was trying to get close with her again. Tommy being jealous is like 6th on the list of his problems with Matt, and this is spelled out by Tommy himself in a previous issue when he tries to confront Matt about how he believes Matt's letting his newfound powers and attention blind him to Grace's manipulations, rightfully pointing out that it's suspicious that Grace has entire trained armies at her disposal, but chose some random teenager to get the power coin. Again, this was before Darkest Hour and before they really insisted on the whole, oh, Grace chose him for his good heart thing. Matt tries to ask if this is about Kim, but Tommy shuts that down immediately. But for some reason, now we're acting like Kim's ex around is the main thing Tommy has a problem with. It's an extremely shallow and immature issue to have, but as the scene doesn't have Tommy argue with Zach about it like he did when Matt brought it up, you're clearly meant to see this as Zach is being correct in his assumption that Tommy's problem is jealousy. And yes, I guess I should point out that at the beginning of MM, there is a moment where Matt and Tommy officially meet for the first time, and Tommy coldly dismisses Matt's attempt at a friendly greeting, which again is justified if you think about how Tommy's knowledge of Matt at that point was that he was Kim's ex, and that she had a bad breakup with him, and he was trying to get close to her again. Also, in general, with how much Matt gets coddled by the narrative and every character afterwards, I really don't care about one scene where someone doesn't immediately fall at his feet. But overall, this writing frames Tommy as in the wrong for not liking him, especially since if this was a problem Tommy was having, he and Kim don't talk about it, so the only resolution for this comes from Tommy eventually accepting Matt. He also doesn't do any of the stereotypical defensive boyfriend stuff like, don't talk to her anymore, stay away from her. Like, this literally is not a problem. It's like the book is gaslighting both the audience and Tommy himself by insisting on us that yes, the problem is just that Tommy is jealous, nothing else. Ignore how he just gave Matt a whole speech about how there's more to Matt's actions that's bothering him, and also ignore how this whole scene with Zach is the first time Zach's been on Earth since Necessary Evil, since he's been out in space doing Omega Ranger stuff. He has no idea about what's been going on for the past few months. This is literally his first time seeing that Matt is a Green Ranger, and he doesn't have any right to act like he has the full picture about the conflict after being on Earth for like 10 minutes. As a bonus, in case that you didn't get that every problem Tommy had with Matt wasn't Matt's fault, he waves away Matt's lukewarm attempt at an apology with saying his attitude just comes with the coin. Like, okay, cool. Just a quick reminder of that silly color influences personality nonsense that never makes sense no matter how many times these comics attempt it, just in case you thought any problem Matt had was a personal flaw. It was just the coin making him xenophobic towards Zordon and creepy towards Kim and an asshole towards Tommy, so everyone should just immediately forgive him. Thanks. I don't like to use words like Mary Sue and creator's pet because they're frankly shallow forms of criticism, and not even used in ways that follow their basic definitions. But it's difficult for me to not think of them here with Matt, because what else am I supposed to say about a character that gets constantly coddled by the narrative like this? A personal grievance for me with these comics is how people accuse the comics of propping Tommy on a pedestal. But really, Matt's storylines are guilty of everything people think the Tommy-centered storylines are. Tommy in the comics was written with flaws, and with those flaws came consequences that he had to deal with. Him being a loner that didn't work well with the group, something that was present before he got the coin that supposedly influences you into being a loner asshole. It was presented as something he needed to develop from, especially after it led to events like the Black Dragon arriving from the coinless dimension and Rita taking over the command center for a while. While Zach could be seen as kind of a jerk towards Tommy and how distrusting he was towards him, and their flaws fed into each other, Zach's attitude was also understandable because the books made sure to address his side of the issue, that he was approached by Rita himself in the past to become her Green Ranger, and thus was afraid of what Tommy was capable of for Rita to choose him, rather than narrow it down to teen drama pettiness like Zach is jealous of Jason's new friendship with Tommy or something. Of course, Zach ultimately apologizes and learns to trust Tommy, but he was not villainized for his issues with Tommy, and Tommy's own flaws were not ignored in favor of everyone patting on his head and calling him a good boy or just saying the green coin made him act that way. Tommy also, in turn, acknowledges his own flaws and how he contributed to the problems that are plaguing the team at that point. Matt does not develop like this because the books don't act like he has flaws to develop from. It's just that everyone around him needs to look past their unfair judgments on him because they just don't realize that he's the perfect ranger for the job and always has been. And the thing about all of this that gets me is it isn't just Matt being an extremely frustrating character. I can handle characters being annoying or badly developed. It's kind of part and parcel to Power Rangers in general. What I can't stand is the books constantly pushing him at the expense of other characters who could have benefited from even the tiniest bit of screen time dedicated to Matt. Because the fact of the matter is the book's taking all this time to push Matt forward, explain why he's just the perfect new ranger that just has to be part of the team, and his non-existent problems means that other characters lose out. Specifically, Rocky, Adam, and Aisha, who really only had one event to establish themselves on the team before Matt comes in as new green and basically takes all of the story potential that they had. Rocky, Adam, and Aisha's constant sidelining by the books isn't totally due to Matt, in fairness. It's also partly the fault of the Omega Rangers, which I'll talk about at a later time. But it's still hard to miss that as soon as Necessary Evil finishes and we see the beginnings of the trio finding their footing as Rangers, we immediately have to bring in Green Ranger Matt and make things all about him, and the trio start to fade into the background. Adam starts Mighty Morphin particularly suspicious about the new green. This goes nowhere, and he doesn't get anything significant right up to the end of the series. We establish Rocky and Matt having met in the past and restarting that friendship now in Angel Grove, which doesn't amount to anything really until an arc long after Ultimate Power and Eltarian War finishes, which, as talked about before, is probably the most in-depth we get with any of the Stone Canyon trio, though it's still annoying how Rocky apparently feels inferior as a ranger to Matt, putting him on Jason and Tommy's level. And Aisha is just kind of there, doing stuff, talking to people, until Darkest Hour starts, and suddenly we're going to ship her and Matt together after they've never significantly interacted before. And unfortunately, after the Matt-centered MM series ends, Matt doesn't have the courtesy of taking a back seat so he can give the underused Stone Canyon trio some spotlight. In fact, things just continue to be all about Matt, to the point where arcs that feel made for the Stone Canyon trio just go to Matt instead. I go into this more in my Darkest Hour review, but think about their roles in that event. Rocky and Adam get written off almost immediately when they get captured and turn into Dark Spectre's slaves, and Aisha just becomes Matt's therapist girlfriend, and any small crumbs of characterization revealed about her happen for Matt's benefit, like suddenly revealing she went to a therapist for anxiety as a kid and thus she can teach Matt some techniques to calm himself down from panic attacks. It's just super unfair to characters that had gotten a rough deal on all accounts since the show itself, that they can't even get fleshed out to the degree the original 6 did, because suddenly we have to push this random OC even over them. All of Matt's angst about feeling like a replacement and then his PTSD over being turned evil, that really sounds relevant to Rocky and Adam's situation here too, doesn't it? But for some reason, Matt's the only one who's allowed an actual storyline exploring these topics, while Rocky and Adam just get a few panels at the very end of the event. To make matters worse, the event's focus on Matt's PTSD, it doesn't even matter in the end, because confusing as it is, Grace's existence as it was gets erased, and therefore it's reasonable to assume Matt's angst over killing his mentor gets forgotten too. Rocky and Adam's angst sure doesn't though, because that wasn't affected by Billy shattering the grid. So then, why did Matt get all the focus on overcoming his angst instead? It didn't matter in the end, outside of the foundation of Matt and Aisha hooking up, which only felt relevant narrative-wise in finally confirming Matt, Kim, Tommy love triangle was fully dead and buried, which, while it was nice for me, was super unfair for Aisha. So really, in the end, nobody won. I think the root of the Matt favoritism goes back to how it seems like the narrative, and the fandom at the time, really wants to say that the defining moment of Matt's character, him leaving the group once he realized they were Power Rangers, is one where he's the most wronged in the situation, and thus him getting the green powers and being part of the team later on is almost what's owed to him. To the point where MMPR number 55, the first ever issue with the new green, is titled Second Chance. As in, Matt gets a second chance at being a ranger with the rest of the team. And to start off, it's very difficult for me to fully sympathize with Matt in the whole, oh, my friends lied to me about being rangers thing, because most importantly, the rangers keeping their identities from him is out of their control. They were following rules set by Zordon, and there are multiple instances where the rangers want to at least tell their loved ones what's going on, and Kim specifically wishes that Matt could be a part of this. Second of all, Matt kind of immediately loses any sympathy I might have had for him when his anger over being left out morphs into, revenge that targets Kim specifically. ignoring her. Well, he ignores the whole team, but there was more stakes involved with him ignoring her as his girlfriend, and talking to other girls in front of her right on the wake of their breakup while she is going through her parents' divorce at the same time. It's just overly cruel for the sake of it. But of course, Kim isn't allowed to be angry right back at him, because in the end, she's the one who has to get a wake-up call from her guidance counselor about understanding her loved one's feelings, and apologizes to him first. And then the narrative has her and Matt getting close on screen again with no discussion of his treatment towards her. It's just really uncomfortable how Kim's slight against Matt was 100% out of her control and something she fought against, but Matt's slights against Kim are all his choice, done specifically to hurt her. But he's rewarded with the return of Kim's affection and ranger powers in the end, even if he doesn't, officially hook up with her again. And third of all, getting ranger powers because you're owed them is just a really gross and selfish reason to get ranger powers. And I mean, again, the books are clearly trying to say that no, Matt actually deserves them because he's good and kind and the best boy ever, to the point where Will insists that he didn't actually want ranger powers or the perks of revealing his identity. We'll get to that in a moment. But that underlying implication is still there just by nature of his story being that he was passed over as a ranger, but now he finally gets to be a ranger and he gets to enjoy all the benefits that come with it with no downsides. But not in a way that's interesting or the result of a natural development, but more of, hey, Matt's a man with a name that knows the MMPRs. He gets to be a ranger now, and we'll just pretend that he was always the best candidate, and everyone who's against him just doesn't realize it because they're too unfairly judging him. While I've been wanting to make this video for ages, honestly ever since Matt was revealed as the new Green, I've been holding myself back until Matt eventually got kicked from the book because I wanted to judge his time fully, and he had to go at some point, right? Like I said, he had to die eventually. Sure, the comics are in an alternate continuity, but they still more or less followed the path of the show, and we know Tommy in the show somehow ends up getting his green coin back. Turns out that didn't happen, but the book itself ended, so same difference? But now I'm kind of grateful that I waited this long because one more piece of Matt content just came out that really sums up my problems with him. It takes every critique I've had about him and just ramps it up to 1,000, but tries to frame it as heartwarming, which is just extra irritating. So the deluxe hardcover editions of the main series come with a little bonus story that for the most part I don't take much notice of, because while they're usually fine writing-wise, they tend to focus on backstories or elaboration on comic OCs that I really don't care about, except for the Ranger Slayer, because that's Ranger Slayer. And the newest one for part 2 of Mighty Morphin / Power Rangers focus on, of course, Matt. And everything I've said about Matt's flaws being ignored or scrubbed away in favor of making him the greatest, most worthy, most special boy ever are just ramped up to 100 here. The whole thing is narrated by Matt and just talks about how much he just struggles with his celebrity life as a ranger, how he never wanted to be a ranger, he just wanted to be there for his friends, but he deals with such problems now, like people wanting his attention and free smoothies when he just wants to pay, and a couple of trolls being mean to him on the street, so he almost just wishes he was coinless again. But it's okay, because cities cameoing from all across the franchise are just inspired by him to start up new community and volunteer programs, and sick children are personally writing to him about how he's their hero, and my God, it's just so heavy-handed in how much of a good boy he is. The panel in particular that frustrates me is where a reporter during an interview asks about rumors of brand deals and if he was becoming a superhero influencer. And his response is an immediate, "What? Absolutely not. That's not why I became a ranger." Like, yes guys, thank you for letting me know that Matt would never be involved in something so terrible. Ignore how that actually would line up with his previous characterization in Go-Go Power Rangers, and just in general be an interesting arc in its own right. I'll give this story that I actually attempted to discuss the pros and cons of Matt revealing his identity, which was a plot point that really didn't amount to much in the main series, but it makes it clear that the pros still heavily outweigh the cons, which ultimately ends with everything in Matt's favor, especially when Matt himself doesn't actually contribute anything to the pros and cons. He just inspires everyone to do all these things by nature of existing as a teenage superhero, and the cons are either extremely unrelatable to the average person, oh guys, I'm just too famous, or just perpetrated by stock bullies who are just jealous of his newfound perks. That of course he would never take revenge on her user's powers against. He'll still take those perks of course, but remember guys, he doesn't really want them, he just wants to pay for that free smoothie. At the end of the day, the inconsistencies and emptiness from Matt's inclusion can be explained by the simple fact that he was made a ranger for one reason, so they can show off how they have all 7 MMPR colors active at once. And that's it. But with MMPR Green being arguably the most popular Ranger powers of all time, giving it to someone people might not like could lead to major pushback. So he has to be written as the best, most deserving boy ever, and that's really where things fall flat with him. They take no risks with his character because they're too afraid of him not being accepted by the general public. And because of that, he just becomes this generic hole sucking up time and space that could be used to develop other characters. And you can't say his stories develop the others or the greater lore because he doesn't. He just comes off like a bargain bin Tommy because every facet of his character is taken from who Tommy is. He was the group's sixth friend. He was Kimberly's boyfriend. Now he's the loner Green Ranger that has to be integrated into the group. He even gets his own Green with Evil narrative, which on the one hand would be fine if he ultimately took a different path than Tommy and developed into an antagonist opposite to him. But he doesn't. He ends the series as the group's good friend and Aisha's new boyfriend. He offers nothing new to the team dynamic and nothing new to the overall story. He's an attractive, athletic guy who gets picked to be a Power Ranger because he's nice and Billy still likes him even after not talking to him for years. Funnily enough, at a convention, they said the identity of the new Green was chosen because he affected everyone and not just Tommy. Then the story actually came out and turns out he really just affects Tommy. He did offer something new back in Go-Go Power Rangers when it seemed like he was actually developing into an antagonist, to the point where a double spread cover for Forever Rangers had good guys on one side and bad guys on the other, and he was firmly on the bad guy's side. But obviously that was dropped in favor of the, no wait guys, he's actually the bestest boy ever who should have been a Ranger and would never ever abuse his power in any way. Doesn't he prove the secret identity rule is just bogus? And that's all that matters because we don't need narrative to justify slapping the white and new Green together on covers and combining the Dragon Zord and white Tiger Zord together, an event that's literally prefaced by Matt saying, let's give the people what they want. In the end, the closest we got to a narrative point with him seems to be proving that Rangers not picked by Zordon are just as good as ones picked by him, which any Ranger fan with a slight awareness of the franchise after MMPR has known for 30 years. They even point out in the story that Tommy also proved this, as he was chosen by Rita and not Zordon. But at the same time, Matt is the supposed symbol of this? Why? Because he's wearing the green suit now rather than Tommy? Hey, remember when Matt was parroting really xenophobic comments about Zordon, about how he doesn't really care about the Earth and because he's not from here? Or are we just gonna blame Grace for that? Except also not really, because she's also not manipulating him and genuinely loves him, and ours, and also aren't Zordon's rules stupid anyway? Who even cares? Sorry about this extremely petty video. Power Rangers has no shortage of characters I dislike. Real Chipster fans remember my extreme hatred of Heckleface back in Dino Charge era. But I guess what made Matt so frustrating to me compared to other characters that I simply dislike their personality or whatever it is, came off as the books constantly telling me to ignore my instincts or just ignore what had previously been established in favor of just sitting there and accepting this rando as the best possible idea they've ever had, and they just really need to keep Green Ranger Matt around, despite how boring and repetitive and contradictory to previous arcs his storylines were. I really think they wanted Green Ranger Matt to be this huge hit in the same way Draken and Ranger Slayer were. I remember when number 5 was coming out, articles were like, ooh, comic shops need to stock up because this is really going to sell, but then didn't even get a second printing. But they didn't understand what made Draken and Ranger Slayer so popular in the first place. Despite being alternate versions of Tommy and Kimberly, they were allowed to be their own characters, and that includes allowing them to do terrible things without forcing this, but they're actually really great and likable characters narrative on us at the same time. Ranger Slayer once electrocuted a 15-year-old because she was bothering him, and this was after she broke free from the evil spell, and people still love her. I saw a lot of potential in making Matt a Ranger, even a new Green Ranger, but a lot of that potential came from building off his past storylines and personality. What would happen if a former member of the group, who has everything going for him in his family life, social life, and school life, who thought himself as the chosen one, the ultra special one, to the point where he bitterly broke himself off from his actual special friends, suddenly did get the powers and attention he coveted? Specifically getting those powers from someone who had an established grudge against Zordon and could feed into his resentment against his former friends. And apparently the answer is just, he would love his friends and be the perfect ranger, and people unfairly judge him for that when he's out here inspiring sick children to keep on living. And isn't that just the most boring route to take? At least Kim punched him in the face one time. That was cool.